The idea to create this video essay came to me after I was asked a series of questions about boy bands on a date, and I realized I had a lot more to say about this topic than I thought I did. I have this problem where I assume that the things I know are common knowledge, and that's not always the case. Growing up in the fandom space, there's an entire world, a language, a series of customs that only others in the same fandom space understand. That realization made me realize that I want to create something of my own instead of just engaging in other people's work. I thought if even one person learned something new through this, then I'll consider it a success. As a resident theater kid, the idea of people singing and dancing simultaneously has always been the standard for me. My favorite musical is West Side Story, after all. The musical is an adaptation of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet and tells the story of star-crossed lovers caught between rival street gangs, the Jets and the Sharks. West Side Story sparked my fascination with groups of young people performing in unison, dressed cohesively, dancing through intricate choreography, and singing their hearts out. I've always preferred music with multiple voices and harmonies, so boy bands quickly became a special interest of mine. My boy band journey began with One Direction and has grown from there. In this deep dive, I want to analyze the boy band as an art form in the same way we study theater, film, or visual art. I'll explore the history and evolution of boy bands, common tropes, what makes them work, and their impact on young people. Most importantly, I'll examine why they matter and why the term boy band should not be dismissed. While I've tried to include as many groups in this video as possible, listing every boy band in history would be an impossible task. For example, Japan's music industry has developed its own independent ecosystem with a rich history of groups worthy of a video on its own. Here, I'll focus primarily on Western groups and the K-pop industry since they are the most interconnected. My goal is to also focus mainly on how each notable group throughout history has shaped the genre, so I will not be doing super deep dives of every group I mention. Please feel free to comment below any groups I may have missed that are worthy of checking out. I've also linked a playlist in the description featuring some of my favorite boy band songs, including a few not mentioned in this video. Disclaimer, my goal is to study the boy band as an art form. As with any art form, there's no single absolute truth. I'll share my honest opinion on certain groups, but please remember, these are my personal perspectives. You're welcome to draw your own conclusions. So let's dive in. So what exactly is a boy band? There isn't one clear definition. The Oxford English Dictionary calls it a pop group composed of young men whose music and image are designed to appeal primarily to a young teenage audience. Merriam-Webster says almost the same thing, a small ensemble of males in their teens or 20s who play pop songs geared especially to a young female audience. Both definitions focus on the same idea: youth, pop music, teenage fans. But they're very clinical. I wanted something more subjective. So I dug through Reddit and Urban Dictionary to see how people online describe boy bands. Two responses stood out to me. On Reddit, one user answered a question about whether or not My Chemical Romance would be considered a boy band. Their reply was, a boy band is a group of teenage boys or men in their early 20s who play pop, bright, happy, in my opinion, shit music, who aim to please teenage girls most commonly. MCR's themes are dark and more like emo, punk, rock, and such. There is no way they are a boy band. Plus, people wouldn't call Green Day a boy band just because they are all guys. And then on Urban Dictionary, the definition was even harsher. Any band put together by corporate machines to feed off the prepubescent or teen audience. In other words, a band not about music, but about money, fame, and greed. Always consists of pretty boys used to latch onto horny teenage girls with a non-threatening image. Just another word for lame, really. Both of these jumped out to me because of their negative connotations. The term boy band is often treated like an insult, something fake, shallow, or not real music. And that's interesting because male-dominated genres with mostly male fans don't get the same stigma. So here's my definition. A boy band is a group of at least 3 young men, each with distinct personalities, marketed to a young audience, usually female, and where every member contributes vocally. Notice I didn't include genre. That's on purpose. A boy band doesn't have to sing straight pop music, just a genre that is popular with young people. What really matters is the marketing, the young audience, and the way the group is presented both as individuals and as a unit. With that in mind, let's take a look at how boy bands have grown and evolved into the global sensations we know today. Theater and music have always been with us since the very beginning of storytelling. In ancient Greece, this took the form of the Dithram, a chorus of men performing poetry and songs in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine and theater itself. For a while, this was the main event. That is, until one man, Thespis, stepped out from the chorus to deliver lines on his own, becoming the world's very first actor. Can you tell I really like theater history? Meanwhile, across Africa, long before colonization, music was already thriving as a deeply communal tradition. Tribes like the Zulu, Xhosa, and Yoruba developed complex harmonies, layered rhythms, and choral singing styles that carried history, spirituality, and identity through sound. During the height of the slave trade, those who were enslaved used music as a way to communicate with other enslaved people and feel a release from the nightmare that was slavery, obviously. The use of choral sound and call and response became a staple of the African spiritual genre. When slavery was abolished in 1865, those same spirituals evolved into what we now know as gospel. One of the first and most groundbreaking of these gospel groups was the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Founded just a year after the Civil War ended at the HBCU Fisk University, this group toured the US and Europe, introducing audiences to African American spirituals. In many ways, they were among the first vocal groups to cross into the mainstream. The connections between the boy band sound and gospel music traditions will continue to this day. Around the same time, in the mid to late 1800s, another vocal tradition was flourishing: barbershop quartets. While men had likely been harmonizing informally for generations, the first mention of these quartets showed up in the 19th century when America was a melting pot of cultures. Immigrant songs, African American spirituals, hymns, and poetry began to mix, creating something new. Barbershop wasn't just about four voices blending together, it was about storytelling and camaraderie. Groups like the American Four and the Hamtown Students became early standouts, paving the way for vocal harmony groups of the future. In the 1920s, the radio became more accessible and music became more widespread, with the most popular sound being jazz bands and the crooners that led them. Jazz bands in general had to focus more on instrumentals, while the barbershop quartets focused mostly on vocals. In the 1930s, barbershop quartets continued to see more success. Most notably, the Mills Brothers, who were one of the most recorded groups of all time. Their music had a playful wittiness to it, and they were the first Black vocal group to achieve crossover success, even performing in front of British royalty in 1936. The Mills Brothers opened the doors for Black groups in the popular music scene and became the first commercially successful male vocal group in the West. During that time, there were also the Ink Spots, who also had a tongue-in-cheek quality to their performances. Their performances often played with the dynamic between group members, joking with one another through song in a way that felt fresh and relatable. And clearly at this time, age was not nearly as important as the artistry and performance quality. The 1940s kept the barbershop tradition alive and thriving, but this decade also gave us something brand new: the rise of the teen idol. More specifically, Frank Sinatra. Sinatra got his start in the barbershop quartet, the Hoboken Four. That barbershop style was his launching pad, and from there he skyrocketed. His fans, mostly young women, earned the name Bobby Soxers for their ankle socks they wore while screaming and fainting at his concerts. Additional popular groups at the same time were the Four Aces, the Chords and their white copycat, the Crew Cuts, the Four Lads, and the Jubilaires. The Jubilaires are also notable for experimenting with rhythm and spoken word delivery that, when you listen back today, sounds a lot like early rap.
You know the salt clad sailor repent 100 years he hammered and sawed, building the ark by the grace of God.
Adding in a rap verse would become a staple in boy band music to come. By the 1950s, barbershop was evolving once again, this time into doo-wop. Groups like the Four Freshmen, the Zodiacs, and the Monotones kept harmony front and center, but their performances felt youthful in a way barbershop never had. By the end of the decade, the wave of rock and roll was in full effect, with the Isley Brothers being one of the first groups to embrace the genre. Their performances also stood out against earlier barbershop quartets as they incorporated more dance in their performances. At the same time, the world was introduced to Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, who were clear predecessors to the Jackson 5. They are the first group on the list to feature an entire ensemble of young men, and the first group aimed at the new emerging market, teenagers. I find this group in particular really interesting because after their success, we'll start to see this formula pop up again and again, where the member with the childlike voice, most often than not the youngest member, is positioned as the main singer. This idea of being forever young is the essence of what makes a boy band. The 60s were a tumultuous time for many obvious reasons, and when it comes to art created in the 60s, there was an emphasis on counterculture and changing the status quo. The advocacy of civil rights activists broke down the color barrier even further, and with second wave feminism in full effect, women were allowed to express themselves even more freely than they ever were before. This allowed boy groups to be able to market themselves directly to young women who were now able to explore their interests and sexuality more freely. At the turn of the decade, the Beatles were formed in Liverpool, comprising of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. The Fab Four took the world by storm with their boyish charm and mix of African-American rock and roll and classical music. Regarded as the best-selling music act of all time, they are also notable for the cultural phenomena they created within their fans. The Beatles' following, made up largely of young women, wasn't passive. They were loud, emotional, devoted, and unapologetic about it, birthing modern fan culture. Beatlemania took the world by storm, and music executives have tried to recreate that success ever since. The Beatles also kicked off what became known as the British Invasion, a wave of UK acts who crossed the Atlantic and found massive success in America. Groups like the Bay City Rollers in Scotland, who wouldn't peak until the 70s, rode in on that same wave. And their success inspired something brand new in television, the Monkees. Dreamed up as a fictional band for a TV show about four young guys chasing stardom, the Monkees became the first boy band assembled for the screen. Meanwhile, in the US, on the West Coast, the Beach Boys had a distinct California surfer flair. On the East Coast, the Four Seasons, led by Frankie Valli's iconic falsetto, represented Newark, New Jersey. The success of the Four Seasons would then inspire the hit Broadway musical Jersey Boys, that functions as a biopic of the band. Both the Beach Boys and the Four Seasons became some of the highest-selling acts of all time. In 1960, Tamla Records was officially renamed Motown Records and founded by Berry Gordy Jr. in Detroit. Motown was often described as running like an assembly line. Every person from the songwriters to the choreographers had a role in shaping the music and the stars who performed it. Most importantly, their artist's personal development department, led by the iconic Maxine Powell, trained Motown artists not only in how to sing, but how to move, how to dress, even how to walk and talk like stars. The distinct Motown sound comes from a blend of genres like gospel, jazz, and pop music, and this allowed artists to achieve crossover success. By 1971, the label had a total of 110 Billboard hits. The Motown team was incredibly innovative in how artists achieved success, and their musical groups were extremely cohesive, coordinated, and charming, and most importantly, they didn't play any instruments like the doo-wop and barbershop grotesque groups before them. The detail in their presentation became the blueprint for the modern boy band. Some of the most notable male groups from Motown during the 60s were the Four Tops, the Contours, and the Temptations. The Temptations were the first extremely popular male group from Motown to reach crossover fame, and they have some of my personal favorite songs of all time. Oh, you should check out the miniseries released by NBC if you haven't already. It's so good.
They coming to see me.
They coming to see the Temptations.
Ain't nobody coming to see you, Otis.
And I know some of these groups may have also been popular in other decades, but in this list I want to showcase when the groups were at their highest success. Towards the end of the decade, Motown signed the Jackson 5. Taking inspiration from Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, brothers Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and a young Michael Jackson achieved massive success with young audiences of all races. The group was notable for portraying a positive image of Black youth, especially with their animated series, The Jacksons. They were huge at the time, having a Jackson mania of their own. The aesthetics of Michael and the rest of Jackson 5 would be emulated time and time again to this day. In the wake of the Jacksons' success, the Osmonds released One Bad Apple, a song so similar in style to the Jackson 5 that many fans thought it was actually the Jacksons. The Osmonds were a Mormon family in Utah who had similar origins to the Jacksons, with the youngest member, Donnie, and Michael Jackson becoming close friends because of it. Some would argue that the Osmonds were the Jacksons' biggest rivals at the time. Outside of pop, there were gospel groups pushing the genre further by incorporating elements of rock and roll and soul, like the Mighty Clouds of Joy. By the 1970s, Motown itself had started to evolve. The polished jazz pop blends of the 60s gave way to a new sound: soul, funk, and what would grow into modern R&B. This is the era of music that was playing when my dad was a teenager, so I listened to a lot of these groups growing up. And my parents wonder why I'm obsessed with boy bands to this day. You had new groups enter the fold, like the Spinners, the Manhattans, the Shy-Lights, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, my personal favorite of this era, the OJs, and many others. Gone were the days of muted suits and careful, almost restrained choreography. The 70s were bold, flashy, and stylish. Groups leaned into charisma and showmanship. This could be due to the steady swing into liberal policies from the government at this time, but who's to say? Both The Temptation and the Jacksons continued their success into the 70s, merging their style with the new popular music genres funk and disco. One of the most popular disco boy groups were the Bee Gees, whose Saturday Night Fever soundtrack brought the black underground genre into the mainstream, introducing disco to entirely new audiences worldwide. Meanwhile, the Whispers were quietly making history. The group was signed to Solar Records, touted as the Motown of the 80s, which would introduce producing giants like L.A. Reid and Babyface. Their smooth vocals, charisma, and sharp choreography became a direct influence on the first modern boy bands of the 80s. Take a look at their performances and you'll see it. The DNA of boy bands as we know them was already in motion. In Boston, 1979, the group New Edition was formed. Originally discovered and produced by Maurice Starr, the group trained to be in sync in choreography, looks, and in harmony. Meant to be a new edition of the Jackson 5, the group wore their influences on their sleeve. For example, the lead singer Ralph has a high tenor range similar to Michael Jackson and Frankie Lyman, and their choreography resembles the likes of the Whispers and the Spinners. Members Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, Ralph, and Michael were all in their early teens, and their family-friendly pop music appealed to young female audiences. Their inherent charm to young girls really solidified the distinction between earlier male singing groups of before and their modern boy band of today. New Edition was able to capture young fans in almost the same way as the Beatles were able to, because their producers were able to market the group members to have distinct personalities. These recognizable characteristics of each member were then used to create a more personal connection to fans through various forms of consumable media. Their rise came in tandem with the MTV era, and their music videos really set the tone for boy band music videos moving forward. Each video was playful, had tongue-in-cheek scenarios, and the way the band interacts with each other and the audience felt more parasocial than earlier Motown artists. New Edition was also the first group to incorporate a rap verse in their songs.
She walks so fast, she looks so sweet, she makes my heart just skip a beat.
Side note, I recently rewatched the New Edition story that BED produced, and I find it so funny that they casted actors who were way hotter than the original guys. Just saying. Their success ushered in the first massive wave of boy bands as we know them throughout the late 80s. After New Edition fired Maurice Starr as their manager, Starr went on to produce a new group from Boston with 5 white boys in the same fashion as New Edition. New Kids on the Block members Jonathan, Jordan, Joey, Donnie, and Danny signed with Columbia Records under the label's Black Music Division in 1984. At first, they were supposed to be marketed towards Black audiences, essentially as rivals to New Edition. However, their first album was a commercial failure. After a pop radio station in Florida accidentally played their record from their second album, Starr and his team at Columbia pivoted their focus to a more pop sound. Their music became so popular with teens that while on tour with the artist Tiffany, the group shifted from opening act to headliners. In addition to New Kids on the Block and New Edition, there was Spandau Ballet, bringing in the sounds of the quintessential 80s Brit pop into the boy band fold. and Menudo, who introduced the world to Latin teen pop. Menudo was also notable for having a unique system. Members would graduate once they reached a certain age, making way for younger replacements. It kept the group eternally youthful and perpetually appealing to their core audience of teenagers. In the early 90s, the success of pop boy bands in the US began to fizzle out. The music landscape was shifting, gangsta rap was exploding, grunge was taking over MTV, and New Jack Swing was redefining R&B. After singing Can You Stand the Rain to New Edition member Michael Bivins, Boyz II Men were signed to Motown and produced by Bivins himself. The four members were Michael, Sean, Wanya, and Nathan. Bivins also produced two other boy bands at the same time, Another Bad Creation and Sudden Impact, who would both appear in the Boyz II Men music video Motown Philly. Bivins groups had a distinct New Jack Swing sound that catered towards younger audiences, as you can hear in the hit song Poison by Belle Biv DeVoe. The group was formed by New Edition members Ricky Bell, Michael Bivins, and Ronnie DeVoe. Boyz II Men's biggest hits, however, would end up being their R&B ballads. In fact, they became the third musical artist ever to replace themselves in the top spot on the Billboard 100 after Elvis and the Beatles, making them one of the top charting artists of all time. They were also unique in that they didn't dance. After the release of Motown Philly, you'll hardly see them bust a move, and they're a group that focused primarily on their vocal prowess. Boyz II Men didn't shy away from more mature topics, which gave them a more universal appeal. Their immense success led to other R&B groups forming at the start of the decade in the same model. You had All for One, arguably the most egregious Boyz II Men copy, Shy, Tony Tony Tony, Soul for Real, Color Me Bad, and High Five. There was also Jodeci, who took the mature sound even further and even more explicitly. Most of these groups wouldn't hit their peak until later in the decade, when the boy band wave hit full swing. Pop groups didn't go away completely, however, in the early 90s. In the UK, pop boy bands were starting to create a sound of their own, with groups like Boyzone and Take That. And if you haven't already, you should check out the film Better Man. Yes, it's that monkey movie that describes the life of Robbie Williams, and Take That in particular. Take That really leaned into the idea of each member having a distinct, marketable persona. You had the heartthrob, the shy one, the cheeky one. It was a blueprint that would become essential for the boy bands of the late 90s. At the very same time, across the globe, in South Korea, Lee Soo-man was working on establishing his own boy band after being inspired by Michael Jackson on MTV while studying abroad at California State University. Lee Soo-man built his own version of the Motown machine by using an assembly line approach to stardom. Every detail mattered. Training in vocals, dance, style, and even how artists interacted with the media. In the early 90s, the first K-pop boy band, So Taiji and the Boys, debuted. Through their street style and use of hip-hop, K-pop's use of Black American influences is super clear and will continue to be a topic of debate even now. I'd call 1995 to 2002 the true golden age of boy bands, in my opinion. Groups that formed earlier in the decade got their place cemented in pop culture in the late 90s and early 2000s. In Orlando, Florida in 1993, Luke Pearlman held auditions for a new group that had the look and feel of New Kids on the Block with the sound of Boyz II Men. After extensive auditions and training, the Backstreet Boys were formed in 1994, consisting of members Nick, Howie, AJ, Brian, and Kevin. Their first album, the self-titled Backstreet Boys, was released in Europe and in Canada first, before being released in the US in 1997. It wasn't until their second album that they hit it big with Backstreet's Back. The Backstreet Boys really solidified what the modern boy band sound and aesthetic is. Their aesthetic was perfectly pleasant, not too macho, not too soft, not overly aggressive, not too goofy. Their team perfected the stereotype of boy band songs, being super specific but also about nothing in particular, with I Want It That Way, and the iconic music video continues to be referenced to this day. With Backstreet's Back, they were one of the first boy groups to embrace being super conceptual in various projects. Backstreet Boys really just championed the cringy aspects of being in a boy band, and I love them for that. Just as Backstreet Boys were reaching their height, their original manager Lou Pearlman was pulling a Maurice Starr and forming their rival group unbeknownst to the Backstreet Boys members in Orlando. After weeks of training together and a member switch, Chris, JC, Joey, Justin, and Lance debuted as NSYNC in 1996. Like the Backstreet Boys, they hit it big in Europe, specifically Germany, before gaining success in the US. They were first viewed by young audiences in America by performing on Radio Disney after the Backstreet Boys said no to the gig. This led to the group being Disney's first attempt at pushing and promoting a boy band. The similarities between NSYNC and Backstreet Boys did not go unnoticed, with the two groups being pitted against each other right from the beginning. Even back then, the two groups were hardly seen with each other, despite having similar origins. The differences, although subtle, were definitely in the way the two groups were presented. While Backstreet Boys were more demure and focused on charm, NSYNC had a more playful and goofy vibe. NSYNC were the rowdy boys next door you would always have a good time with, while the Backstreet Boys were the type of guys you wanted to bring home for dinner. After parting ways with Lou Pearlman, they welcomed the super conceptual vibe that Backstreet Boys started with their album No Strings Attached. Now, if you're asking me who's the better boy band of the two, I would have to say Backstreet Boys. They were just more cohesive in both their harmonies and look, and they're still performing together today, so I guess they figured something out. While NSYNC and Backstreet Boys were arguably the most popular and successful groups of this era, there were so many groups reaching massive success and popularity among young audiences. What's interesting about this golden era is that, besides NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, I'd say there was definitely a color barrier within the rest of the groups. Most did not see the same crossover success among races that the earlier boy bands of the 70s and 80s did. The most popular black boy band to emerge at this time was B2K. The members consisted of Lil Fizz, J-Boog, Raz B, and Omarion, and were the first boy band produced by P. Diddy, who will try his hand at creating more boy bands in the future. Their street style concept was a nice switch up of the more passionate, love-making groups of the earlier decade. B2K was also noted for their intricate choreography, led by the iconic choreographer Dave Scott, who would go on to choreograph iconic dance films like You Got Served, Stomp the Yard, and Step Up 2 and 3. B2K raised the bar on boy band choreography entirely. They said, "We're dancers first," becoming super influential on what modern K-pop dance looks like. Other popular groups during this era were Dru Hill, 112, and Immature, later renamed IMX. 98 Degrees were the third most popular white boy band behind NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. 98 Degrees were the white answer to Boyz II Men. Their words, not mine. They were noted for their hyper-masculine and BB builds. Additionally, there was Westlife, who were Ireland's answer to Backstreet Boys, and in my opinion, the true predecessor to One Direction. Other popular groups were East 17, Dream Street, which was a star vehicle for Jesse McCartney, No Authority, who were signed to Michael Jackson's label, and you can clearly hear his sound in their music, and Five, who were the first boy band signed by Simon Cowell. With Five, you can clearly see a distinct look that Cowell strives for in his groups in particular. There were also groups exploring sounds outside of pop music, like Hanson, who had more grunge influences in their sound. The sibling group would become instrumental, no pun intended, in future sibling pop bands like the Naked Brothers Band, who I'd call boy band adjacent, and the Jonas Brothers. In 2000, ABC produced the reality show Making the Band. The show followed Lou Pearlman as he conducted a nationwide search for multi-talented young men to form his new group. The competition was whittled down to 25 contestants who competed against each other in hopes of debuting in the group. The top 5 contestants formed the group O-Town. After season 1, P. Diddy would take over as the lead producer. Making the Band would become the first boy band survival show of its kind, with many to follow. Following the success of Menudo, other Latin groups started to capture attention. One of them was C-Note, who leaned heavily into Latin pop and R&B sounds in the late 90s. Another was Aventura, formed in the Bronx in 1994, who revolutionized bachata by blending it with hip-hop and R&B. Their lead singer, Romeo Santos, the guy behind the mega hit Propuesta Indecente, became known as the King of Bachata. In West Africa, the boy band wave had its own unique spin. Groups like Style Plus from Nigeria became hugely popular in the early 2000s. The Plantation Boys were pioneers of Nigerian R&B and hip-hop fusion. Another trailblazing Nigerian group, The Remedies, blended Afrobeat and hip-hop, setting the stage for what we now know as Afrobeats. In India, there was also the group called A Band of Boys, who were modeled after Western pop groups but brought in Hindi lyrics and Bollywood flair, making them a regional phenomenon. At the same time, K-pop entered its first generation of groups taking influence from the J-pop music scene, Western trends, and Black American art. The most popular group at the time was H.O.T, or HOT. After Sotaji and the Boys planted the seed for groups to embrace Black American hip-hop and Western sounds, HOT really solidified the visual standard for K-pop groups moving forward. Additional popular groups were G.O.D and Shinhwa. The massive peak of the late 90s and turn of the century seemed to be dying down a bit with the break of NSYNC and Backstreet Boys in 2003. But there were still new, albeit less popular ones coming in. It's around 2003 to 2006 where I'd say the stigma of boy bands being super disingenuous and manufactured really took off. Not that I think all the groups I'm going to list are bad per se, they're just not my favorites. To start, there was Element, who, fun fact, had Mr. Schuster himself in the original lineup. There was also BB Mac, Next, Varsity Fan Club, B44, and Bros. Additionally, you had Jagged Edge continuing the mature R&B sound, LFO, Blue, who's seriously underrated in my opinion, McFly, and B5, P. Diddy's next attempt at producing a boy band. At the same time, K-pop was entering its second generation, and this was the era when groups began to break beyond South Korea and find real international success. One of the first notable trailblazers was TVXQ. From their debut in 2003, they had a rabid fan base that quickly became one of the largest and most dedicated fandoms in the world. TVXQ presented themselves as young and stylish, with each member able to hold his own as a lead singer. You can really see the heavier Japanese influence seep into their fashion and sound, reflecting the growing cross-cultural exchange happening in East Asia. Additionally, there was Super Junior, who showed the world that you can put 1 million members in a group and it'll still be okay. Between 2005 to 2010, there was a dip in the massive success of boy bands that we saw in the earlier part of the decade, which may or may not be a direct consequence of the global recession. There's a few key big hitters in this time frame, however, the boy band domination has taken a major hit. Surprisingly though, a lot of the boy bands that were created during this time frame are still active and still together compared to that of other periods. K-pop continues to grow in success both domestically and internationally as its second generation of groups continues to debut. Starting out as South Korea's answer to B2K, Big Bang ushered in K-pop's surge in international success. With their experimentation in both sound and style, the group quickly became one of South Korea's most influential music acts and was dubbed the Kings of K-pop. In 2008, SM debuted SHINee, who came out of the gate with the best debut song and whose advanced choreography and style pushed K-pop performances even further. Other popular groups who debuted around the same time were 2AM, 2PM, U-KISS, Beast, SS501, Teen Top, and Boyfriend. In 2005, Kevin, Joe, and Nick Jonas signed to Columbia Records before moving to Hollywood Records and were officially labeled a Disney-produced group. They debuted on the Disney Channel in 2006, where they appeared in an episode of Hannah Montana as themselves. The group then went on to star in Camp Rock and Camp Rock 2 and played fictional versions of themselves in the sitcom Jonas and its spin-off Jonas LA. In 2018, the group got back together after going on hiatus back in 2013 and have been releasing music together ever since. Other groups who were debuting around this time were US5, JLS, and NLT. You should check out NLT's music if you haven't already. Their music has a touch of producing giants like Neo, Pharrell, Ryan Tedder, and Timbaland. To compete with the success of the Jonas Brothers at Disney, Nickelodeon began development for the show Big Time Rush, which would take inspiration from the Monkees television show back in the 60s. The show followed 4 childhood friends, Kendall, Logan, Carlos, and James, as they formed a boy band and navigate their newfound fame. The show would highlight new music from the group, who would then release the songs through Columbia Records. Big Time Rush was a huge hit, and the group was able to headline multiple tours. The show ended its 4-season run in 2013, and the group went on hiatus in 2014. In 2021, Big Time Rush officially reunited, buying the rights to their name, and have been touring together ever since. At the same time, Little Girls were getting a new group of their own. In the late 90s and early 2000s, most of the Black R&B groups focused more on mature topics and sounds. Thus, in 2011, Mindless Behavior stole the hearts of thousands of tweens with the release of Mrs. Right. The quartet consisted of members Ray Ray, Princeton, Rock Royal, and main vocalist Prodigy, and they really had this cool edge to them while their lyrics remained child-friendly. Mindless Behavior focused on clean choreography and hip styles, popular during this electronic swag era in fashion. In the UK, a new phenomenon was in the works. In 2010, Niall, Harry, Louis, Liam, and Zayn all auditioned separately for the new season of X Factor. After almost being sent home during the boot camp portion of auditions, the 5 teens were put together by Simon Cowell and Nicole Scherzinger, thus forming One Direction as we know it, with Harry Styles coming up with the name. I don't need to go into a huge overview of the history of One Direction, as I'm sure you already know it, having clicked this video. However, I do want to note what made them unique and how they have impacted the way boy bands are presented today. To start, One Direction couldn't dance, which isn't unheard of for boy bands since the beginning, but at this point it was a very rare occurrence. The group, however, was able to showcase their individual personalities in a way that no other group before them had, through the internet. One Direction's fan base, or Directioners, was the first fandom to really form through the internet. Fans were able to connect with the members and each other directly through social media platforms like Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram later on. We could watch their lives or even find out more accurately what each member was doing at any given moment. Honestly, after becoming a K-pop stan and seeing just how much content these groups are posting and their companies, it's actually crazy how much of the fandom lore was developed just through a common headcanon and not actually what was direct to consumer. They're also one of the first groups to not have a clear center or frontman. There were members that were some of the most popular, Zayn, Harry, but they were never marketed as the centers of the group. In fact, when originally putting together the final lineup for the group on X Factor, Nicole Scherzinger built the members around Niall. However, once they were a complete group, Simon Cowell utilized Liam as the pseudo-leader at the time. What makes One Direction work so well is that they were just all around so goofy and looked like they didn't take things too seriously. For the first time, you can feel like a boy band is not just someone you fantasize about being with, but someone you want to be friends with. If you couldn't tell already, I was a huge Directioner, and I cannot even begin to describe how much liking the group as a tween has changed the trajectory of my life. The massive success of One Direction led to the second golden age of Western boy bands in the early 2010s. Groups that were slowly gaining an audience reached huge heights, and new groups formed trying to capitalize off the success of One Direction. Meanwhile, groups like Big Time Rush and Mindless Behavior continued to reach massive heights. I'd argue that One Direction's biggest rival at the time was The Wanted, despite their popularity not quite reaching the records One Direction were able to break. The only similarities to 1D that they have are that they're British, they have one South Asian member, and they were formed inorganically through auditions. The Wanted were for the more mature crowd who liked to party. They made me believe this is what being a young adult meant. A Western group formed more closely to the One Direction model was Union J, probably the most egregious One Direction knockoff. I don't even remember this group, but even their thumbnails are incredibly similar to One Direction's style and color grading. In the US, there was Emblem 3, the surfer skater dude version of One Direction, which I didn't realize they were still making music together. In Australia, there was The Collective, and in Latin America, there was P9. The X Factor Arabia had their own One Direction moment with The Five in 2015. Other boy bands formed at the same time include IM5, CD9, and Midnight Red. During this massive peak, New Kids on the Block and Backstreet Boys formed a supergroup and released an album together, which I had never heard of it before until doing my research. New boy bands were forming in and around the internet as well, with YouTube vloggers the Janoskians forming a boy band and releasing music alongside their content. Secondly, the YouTube boy band, formed by several YouTubers who were part of the massive popularity of British vloggers at the time for Red Nose Day. I'd also argue that the rise in these British YouTubers is directly linked to the success of One Direction. There was also YTF, formed by Ryan Higa, Kev Jumba, and several other Asian American YouTubers. My sister and I were obsessed with them. The rap group Brockhampton also formed at this time, gaining a cult-like following for focusing on rap music instead of the typical boy band pop sound. The group had a distinct sound, releasing 8 albums in 5 years, and were made up of a super diverse group of young artists. On the instrumental side of things, 5 Seconds of Summer emerged after being discovered by Louis Tomlinson and the One Direction team. After opening for the group on the Take Me Home tour, Five Sauce earned their own massive fan base. In addition to 5 Seconds of Summer, there was The Vamps, whose lead sounds exactly like Harry Styles, and K-pop groups like CN Blue, FT Island, and Day6. K-pop was also on the rise due to the record-breaking hit that was Psy's Gangnam Style. In the early 2010s, K-pop was just transitioning from its second generation to third generation. The most successful third-gen groups didn't really hit their massive peak until the late 2010s, but in the early parts of the decade, some of the most popular groups were NU'EST, Block B, Infinity, VIX, Winner, BAP, or BAP, and BTOB. Also, did you know that Jackie Chan formed his own K-pop boy band called JJCC? Between 2015 to 2020, the focus of boy bands shifted from the West to the East. Before this time frame, when you're talking about a boy band, you were most likely talking about a boy band in the West, but during this time frame it kind of shifted, so now when you talk about a boy band, people assume you're talking about K-pop. In 2015, Zayn Malik shocked the world by leaving One Direction. After a 5th and final album, One Direction goes on an indefinite hiatus, leaving the world without a massive boy band for a short time. While K-pop was making its way into a steady global rise, it wasn't until BTS hit it big with their push to the mainstream both in Korea and in the West with their release of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Forming back in 2010, the 7-member group consists of RM, Suga, J-Hope, Jungkook, Jin, Jimin, and V. They debuted in 2013. Initially marketed as a hip-hop group, the group swiftly shifted into a more pop-hip-hop fusion in 2015. Their massive success continued to rise with the release of DNA, which landed them a performance on the American Music Awards stage, thus bringing in the Korean wave. While complicated choreography and elaborate music videos were standard for K-pop before BTS's popularity, I believe BTS was able to capture huge audiences with their passionate performances and involvement in the creation of their music. It made the storylines in their music videos more engaging, and their performances were captivating. Additionally, they elevated ways to showcase authenticity in K-pop and how content was provided to fans, even further than that of the 1D Diaries before, with their BTS Run and Bangtan Bomb YouTube series. By vlogging their experience behind the scenes and filming the members doing various random activities, fans from around the world can connect to the members in a different and more personal way. I think that's why becoming a fan of K-pop is so easy. It feels like we're experiencing their career trajectory and the world around them alongside with them. With BTS dominating the global charts, other third-gen groups were able to capture massive fan bases on their own. Music videos and performances from boy bands were becoming more elaborate and reaching incredible heights. Some of the most popular third-gen groups include EXO, who I'd argue were BTS's biggest rivals at the time, GOT7, 17, which is one of my favorite groups, Monsta X, NCT, and iKON. These groups were innovative not only in how modern boy bands were presented, but also in the K-pop genre itself. For example, NCT's model of several unit groups and consistently adding in new members was relatively new in K-pop and had a similar model to that of EXILE Tribe in Japan and Menudo. Other groups on the rise include Pentagon, Astro, Victon, 101, Ace, SF9, ONF, and VAV. At the end of 2017, with the debut of The Boys, K-pop entered its fourth generation of artists. Taking inspiration from BTS and other third-gen groups, the choreography became harder and the music became much louder and heavy-hitting. Groups like Stray Kids, ATEEZ, and TXT made their mark from the jump with global audiences due to their sounds and synced performances. Other popular fourth-gen groups to emerge in the late 2010s include AB6, CIX, Very Very, ONEUS, Only One Of, and X1. Western boy bands didn't go away in the late 2010s despite the increasing popularity of K-pop. In 2017, Simon Cowell tried his last attempt at a group. The group was called Pretty Much, and they present a more modern, Gen Z street style to boy bands that'll stick around. Pretty Much had a fusion of pop and R&B, and their style was more streetwear and casual than groups like One Direction or Big Time Rush. I think with better marketing, they could have been so much bigger as a group, as their street style would become a staple for groups from then on. Other Western groups also emerged in the late 2010s, although they never reached the heights that groups of the early 2010s did. Some groups of this time frame include Why Don't We, Next Town Down, 5 After Midnight, Raksu, Hometown, and Forever in Your Mind, who were Disney's next boy band that they promoted. In 2017, ABC premiered Boy Band in hopes of finding America's next hit boy band. The winners would be decided via audience voting each week. The group formed on the show in real life didn't end up making a huge impact with wide audiences, however they did achieve moderate success with a smaller, more dedicated fan base. Another group, Fourth Ave, also formed from the show's contestants. In Latin America, CNCO broke records with their Reggaeton Lento release. CNCO was the first major Latin boy band since Menudo to reach massive heights and had much more of a reggaeton flair that was in line with the rise of Latin music at this time. I'd argue that as hip-hop became the most popular music genre in the late 2010s, the sound of boy band music began to shift as well. Rap verses, which had been a staple in the early days of boy band music thanks to groups like New Edition, largely disappeared during the pop-heavy Backstreet Boys era. But by the late 2010s, they came back with full force. With trap music reaching its peak, Migos became huge, functioning both as a rap group and as a new kind of modern boy band. Their signature triplet flow, while not entirely original, exploded in popularity across the music scene at the time. And yes, I would absolutely call them a boy band. They just happen to all rap instead of sing. But I think they fit the criteria out of all the rap groups I've seen. They even pay homage to early boy bands of the 70s in their Walk It Talk It music video. Thus, we enter the 2020s. The golden age of boy bands has left again. However, unlike 20 years prior, the number of boy bands in the public eye has not decreased. In fact, it feels like there are more boy bands active nowadays than in the last 50 years combined. Which, don't fact check me on that, I am just exaggerating. The 2020 pandemic put the live music industry on pause. COVID also increased the need to consume more content than ever, which shifted the way fans interacted with groups and discovered new groups entirely. Live stream concerts became more prominent, and more groups formed their own variety shows on YouTube. With the premiere of God's Menu by Stray Kids, the visuals of K-pop music videos became more elaborate and expensive, almost hitting a movie-like quality with most groups. Post-pandemic, K-pop fourth-gen groups continued their rise. Popular groups like ENHYPEN, Treasure, P1 Harmony, Tempest, Unite, Epix, and Omega X emerged and grew dedicated fan bases. In 2023, while BTS were in hiatus due to the military service, K-pop entered its fifth generation, with ATEEZ's little brother group Xikers being one of the first to debut. With fifth gen, the focus was on even more complicated and heavy-hitting choreography and elaborate visuals. The level of production that goes into these new groups is actually insane. Popular fifth gen groups include Zero Base One, Boy Next Door, TOUS, Rise, &TEAM, Evan, POW, 82 Major, The Wind, 8-Turn, ONEPACT, &1, and Zodiac. In the West, groups continue to form. However, the heights that Western groups reached in the early 2010s were never fully reached again due to the shifting interest in the West. A few new groups that are slowly making waves include No Guidance, which is my current favorite Western group, 2BYB, Elevator Boys, and Full Circle Boys. There are also new Western groups being formed by K-pop companies like Dear Alice and HYBE's new Latin group that's currently in the works. Their survival show is currently on YouTube called Santos Bravos if you want to check it out to see how they're being formed. With Netflix's Making the Band, new groups like Midnight Till Morning and Solidified are changing the way groups are beginning to form. With their upcoming releases, we'll see how the change in formation will fare in terms of sales and success. This year, new K-pop 5th gen groups continue to debut. More recently, I've noticed a shift in those larger-than-life concepts for something more balanced and relatable like boy bands from before, with new groups like Close Your Eyes, ARC, Identity, I Did, and Big Hit's new group Cordis. There are also new 5th gen groups with innovative concepts like Plave using motion capture, Big Ocean, who consists of members who are hard of hearing or deaf, X-Love, who embraces a genderless concept, and Universe, who features 2 North Korean members. As of writing the script, Boys 2 Planet just finished their final episode, so we'll see how Alpha Drive 1 fares in terms of success. Rooting for them. Additionally, the popularity of boy bands today isn't just limited to the West or South Korea. Groups from other pop music industries around the world have also been on the rise. With the growth of the internet and social media in the 2010s, the connectivity between fans and artists have become stronger than ever. Take Japan, for instance, whose music industry is big enough to sustain itself, has finally made it easier for international fans to access content from music acts in the country. Psychic Fever, and in turn the rest of Exile Tribe, have been making waves in the US. Other Japanese groups making global waves are BE:FIRST, Mazel, Joy, Number I, Snowman, IMP, and DXT. With the growing success of SB19, P-pop, or Pinoy pop, has also started to make waves internationally. SB19 were the first P-pop group to be nominated for the Billboard Music Awards. Other popular groups from the Philippines include Alamat, BYGO, and GAT. There's also an increase in the popularity in the T-pop genre, with the rise of BL and other Thai media. Groups like Lycan, Proxy, Bus, Atlas, Persis, Jasper, and DICE have been able to capture international audiences like never before. And new global groups are still in the works, like Daesay, a new up-and-coming South African boy band, and First Five, an up-and-coming Indian group. Like I mentioned before, today boy bands are still huge. However, since BTS's reign in the late 2010s and early 2020s, we have yet to see another boy band take over the top spot in global domination. I try to keep each major section in the evolution brief, or this video would be too long, as if it's not already far too long. So please let me know in the comments if there's any groups that you'd like me to do a deep dive of even further, or any groups I may have missed. There are also groups in other genres that are worth noting, like rock, gospel, or even a cappella group. My focus on this evolution was mostly on music genres that are popular with young people at the time, but happy to do a deep dive on any of those groups in particular as well. Now that we've gone over the evolution of boy bands, let's go over what makes a good boy band to begin with. Now, these are my own personal opinions, so please take them with a grain of salt, as I know everyone has their own standards and own groups that they follow. But if you're asking me, which I'm assuming you are since you clicked this video, there are certain factors that make a boy band have it. To start, the group has to be cohesive and connected. They don't have to necessarily be best friends with each other, but the members should have a synergy and chemistry that we can feel as an audience. The connection between boy band members should make the audience feel like they want to be a part of the group alongside with them. Think Backstreet Boys together in interviews, Boyz II Men's harmonies, and 17's razor-sharp synchronized choreography. Alongside that cohesion, a boy band also needs to showcase the personalities and strengths of all the members, even if there is a clear frontman. Every member should feel like an essential part of the group's identity. When done right, it's like a puzzle. If even one piece is missing, the whole image feels incomplete. Think One Direction, Jonas Brothers, or even BTS. Then there's performance. The group needs to own the camera, the stage, and the audience's full attention. There's a certain confidence that comes from groups who are not afraid of being seen as vulnerable or going all in. It makes them admirable when they're able to fully embrace the genre that they're a part of. Think ATEEZ delivering cinematic level performances, and NSYNC and B2K performing with a youthful intensity. The most successful boy bands have an average life cycle of 3 to 5 years in the spotlight, coinciding with the age group of their fan base. As fans grow up, the obsession naturally cools and the group's mainstream spotlight dims. However, the best boy bands find ways to extend their relevance through reinvention, nostalgia, or in artistry. Going back to the music, it's important to determine what makes a good boy band song. In my opinion, the genre of boy band music doesn't necessarily have to be bubblegum pop, but it should include elements of popular music genres at the time, whether that's pop, rock, rap, R&B, electronic, whatever. Boy bands are supposed to appeal to the widest audience possible, and in doing so, their music has to relate to what young people at the time are listening to. So what makes a great boy band song? There are a few identifiers to make a boy band song stand out and perfectly encapsulate all that the boy band genre has to offer. Again, these are my personal opinions, so take them as you will. First, the song has to be universal. Every single girl in the world can relate to the song in a way. Secondly, the song should be specific. Every girl can relate, while it also emotes a specific feeling and a very specific idea, like, let me fix your relationship trauma, or you're too hot to be depressed, or let's date, or let's screw, or I'm sorry. The song should also have personality and showcase the band members' personalities well. From there, the song should also be unique. The song has to feel incredibly unique to the group. Most importantly, the song should feel like an absolute necessity. Boy bands love hard, and they love very specifically. They love with reckless abandon, recognizing the singular perfection of a girl and pursuing her shamelessly. In no particular order, here are some of my favorite boy band songs of all time. I believe each song on this list captures the main pillars of what makes a great boy band song. Universality shines through tracks like the O'Jays' Love Train or One Direction's What Makes You Beautiful, where the lyrics speak to love, joy, and affirmation that anyone can connect with. At the same time, specificity is what makes songs like 98 Degrees' This Gift or O-Town's All or Nothing so powerful. They capture deeply particular emotional moments. Each of these songs also radiates personality. It's Gonna Be Me is playful and cheeky in a way that matched NSYNC's charm, while Jagged Edge's Where the Party At shows off swag and fun. Meanwhile, uniqueness is undeniable in songs like TVXQ's Rising Sun, which blended Eastern and Bollywood influences with K-pop. Most importantly, all these tracks feel like necessities, songs that had to exist for the groups that performed them. Backstreet Boys' I Want It That Way isn't just a pop hit. It feels like the definitive statement of boy band longing. Boyz II Men's End of the Road is an anthem of heartbreak so monumental it became inseparable from the group itself. The list showcases that the boy band genre is music that's emotional, shamelessly direct, and built to connect with fans in a way that feels both personal and universal. Let me know if you'd like for me to list out the top songs more specifically, or even just a longer list of songs that I really like. Now, I couldn't go through this entire analysis without mentioning the importance of the influence of Black music on the boy band genre, as well as the double standard between Black groups and non-Black groups. It's undeniable that the essence of boy band music is rooted in Black American culture, with the earliest iterations of the genre coming directly from Black groups. Yet, despite being the foundation, Black boy bands haven't achieved the same commercial success or cultural recognition as their white counterparts. Now, part of this disparity comes from the stigma within the Black community. Within Black spaces, boy bands are often not taken seriously, while at the same time, systemic biases have made it harder for Black groups to be embraced by the mainstream in the same way that white audiences are. In the article, The Peter Pan Privilege, What the History of Boy Bands Tells Us About Maturity and Race, Blythe Spindler Richardson details the double standard of white boy bands being labeled as eternally youthful, while Black boy bands are forced to mature quickly or become labeled as mature prematurely. She goes on to state, as insubstantial and meaningless as pop music may seem, this phenomenon is yet another head of the same insidious, systematic hydra that keeps Black men unable to safely express a spectrum of emotions, sexualizes them to grotesque proportions, and claims that Black boys as young as 5 as dangerously violent. The cursory rejection of the boy band label of African American performers may be coveted in the music industry, but to have the white Peter Pan privilege is to live without consequences. The success of a boy band often hinges on the youthful identity attached to the genre, but Black groups are rarely afforded that acknowledgement, too often viewed as either too mature or not serious enough. This mirrors the broader societal issue. Black youth are consistently stripped of innocence and pushed into premature adulthood, while white youth are allowed to linger in a state of carefree adolescence. This divide also plays out in cultural consumption. White audiences can opt out of engaging with Black media, while Black audiences in the West are often required to engage with white media as the default standard. Groups that I thought were huge went relatively unheard of to some of my white friends, and there are certain Black groups that weren't even considered boy bands just because of the genre of music that they made, which I found extremely interesting. From the early days of Frankie Lyman to Boy Next Door, one thing is for certain, boy bands will always connect to young female audiences in some way. So what makes them click? Teen idols have always been around, from Franz Liszt and Listomania to Elvis to Justin Bieber. Young people will connect with a charismatic performer who connects the world back to them. The idea of a boy band is relatively new, however, there has always been a need to connect to young female fans. Eve Blake, who wrote the new hit musical Fangirls, did a TED Talk recently explaining her fascination with fangirls. She describes the double standard between the perception of young women liking things and young boys liking things. She states that the idea of young women liking something unapologetically is deemed as crazy or hysterical, while with young men, that's just how things are supposed to be. The musical dives into the psyche of young fans and how it's possible to succumb to the parasocial relationships created through these groups. If you haven't checked out the music from Fangirls the Musical, I'd highly recommend it. It's awesome. Blake does such a good job at capturing what it's really like to be a fan at that age. From what I took from the show, it's that at that age, when the world is telling these young women that they should hate themselves, these boy bands offer an alternative reality where they are connected by community, told they are special and unique, and that they shouldn't apologize for being who they are. Diving deeper, the female gaze is still a relatively new concept, with the majority of modern media still viewed through a patriarchal lens. The true definition of the female gaze is still being defined to this day, but understanding what large groups of women like and engage with can help determine what exactly works when marketing towards women. It's important to point out that the biggest reason boy bands get such a bad rep is that they are marketed towards young girls, which is automatically deemed bad or something that shouldn't be taken seriously. The most common thread I've seen while doing my research is that through a misogynistic lens, there seems to be confusion as to how boy bands gained favor from girls despite not adhering to hypermasculine or patriarchal standards. Think Thor versus Loki. In the Wrapped article, The Absolute Necessity of One Direction, Alana Massey describes the phenomenon of One Direction and the confusion from talking to young boys about how the members of One Direction could have captured the hearts of their classmates. She says, the ever-hardening boys at school might dismiss them in homophobic terms, while being scarcely able to hide their confusion that the unfeeling hypermasculinity they've been socialized to perform isn't yielding the same returns as skinny jeans and the occasional falsetto. To me, the female gaze not only encompasses a man's attractiveness through his looks, but also in his personality. Shameless showcases of strength is not going to mean as much as a man standing there and telling a girl she's not only pretty, but also capable of being loved unconditionally. And to that I ask, what's wrong with a girl being told she's worth it? Especially as a young Black girl myself, something that I've noticed in particular is that there is a very high percentage of suburban Black girls who are fangirls of various groups. I think there's something to be said about the fact that Black girls, who are told they are the least desirable group, gravitate towards a genre that is unapologetically loving. Growing up in spaces that are primarily white or non-Black can be incredibly isolating. And if you're dating as a young Black girl, you can commonly run into the issue of feeling unwanted. But that's a video on its own. I don't think boy bands will ever go away. Like all forms of media, it'll come and go in popularity, but the concept will never disappear. Shady businessmen will always find a way to capitalize off teen girls, from Marie Starr to Lou Pearlman to P. Diddy to Simon Cowell, and the landscape of pop music will constantly shift based on the state of the world. I believe every single generation deserves that one great boy band to influence young people. Boy bands provide a window into an alternative reality where young women are accepted as they are and where everyone can love deeply and without apology. Boy bands not only teach young women what to expect from love, they teach them how to love themselves better. If a man doesn't love you as much as a boy band member loves his fictional girl, then you don't need him. Thus concludes my analysis of the boy band genre. We went over the definition, the evolution, their connections to young audiences, and the music. There are so many topics that I left out that honestly could be a video all on their own, like common tropes in boy band aesthetics, different type of boy band music videos or concepts, the various endorsements boy bands receive, fictional boy bands, or even an analysis on the different types of survival shows that have come out to debut new groups. Let me know in the comments if there's a specific topic that you would like for me to touch on in a separate video. And if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. This is my first time ever doing something like this, and it was really fun to go through this deep dive and write out this entire essay for this topic that I didn't even know I had so much to say about. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and hey, if this does well, I'll do a girl group analysis. Well, class dismissed.